Have you ever been tasked for a job, like at work or in the family or somewhere? Somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, I need you to do something. How do you usually respond to that? How many of you would say, my eager people, yes, thank you, give me responsibility? Okay, how many of you would say, who are you talking to? Go find somebody else. That's my son right there that raised his hand. I saw that hand. Yes, he gets that from his mother. Wait, no. No, there's different ways that we can respond. What about if they ask you to do something and you feel completely out of your depth? Like, we need you to do this, and you're thinking, I don't know how to do that. How many of you are still eager? Maybe. How many of you are saying, nope, definitely not me? Anybody? Okay. There's something interesting about my life is because in my 20s and probably my 30s, I didn't have to know anything. If you just asked me to do something, I was in. Didn't matter. It was just like, okay, fine, I'll figure it out. I was just always that eager to jump into any task. Just let me prove myself. I love this. Let me go. But I think as I've gotten older, I'm much more the opposite direction. I think I'm very much aware of my limitations. I think I'm aware of the things I don't know. And so if somebody's like, Brent, we want you to do this, I'm much less likely to be like, well, I'm more likely to be like, well, maybe not. What about Amy? She'd be a great one to do that, Let them do it. Let her do it, I remember back in the banking days, so a long time ago, it was in a startup bank. Things were new, things were fresh. I came in when we were just 9 months old. And I'll tell you, back then, so this would have been 1999. So in the 1900s, let's present it like that, right? In the 1900s, I worked at a bank. And starting out with them, it was, we didn't have enough people, so everybody's doing everything kind of thing. And I'm just like a sponge soaking up everything. But I noticed there were some things getting dropped along the way. And so I remember one time I went to the CFO, and he was kind of CFO and wore lots of hats on top of that. And he was supposed to be in charge of software rollouts and development and things like this. And he just wasn't good at it. He had obviously way too much to do. So I didn't know anything about this, but I thought, we need these things. So I just went to him one day and I'm like, hey, what if I help you? What if you want to let me do this for you? And I thought he'd look at me and be like, who are you? What qualifications do you have? No. But he was just like, sure, here you go. And I think, okay, this is great. And, he didn't even ask what qualifications. He just said yes. And I assume they let me do it because it didn't come with a pay raise. It didn't come with a title. It just came with more work. What's not to love about that, right? And so I just jumped in. I was eager. And I'm just like, let me go. And this was, all about the back end software, rolling out updates, making the front end people's job easier or better. But what I didn't know, but found out very quickly, was that this role also came with unlimited administrator access to the system. Who are my IT people in the room? Anybody think that sounds a little nuts and crazy to give somebody like me that? Oh, it was absolutely the dumbest thing he could have done. Because I remember one day I'm just in there playing around and I just start hitting buttons. And the next thing I know, most of the front end things that everybody had on their computers was gone. I just somehow erased it, deleted it, and I, in that moment, panicked. I'm like, what just happened? Now, fortunately, within like 5 to 10 minutes, I was able to find like a back button. This was not a Windows-driven system, but I was able to type in some things, and fortunately, no one screamed too loud or really even noticed what had happened. But I discovered, oh, Brent, you might need to handle this a little bit more carefully. You might not be as skilled at this as you think. Back up, buddy. And so, I hope now in my life, maybe it's a little bit of wisdom that keeps me from going, no, sure, give it to me. I'll figure it out. Give it to me. But in life, sometimes we are tasked with things. And maybe we feel like we can do it and we shouldn't. Maybe we feel like we can't do it and we could. What do we do with those moments? And you're thinking, what does this have to do with anything? Well, this is the moment that we come to in Exodus in our Breaking Free series, where we find this guy, the main character outside of God of the story. His name's Moses. You've probably heard of him. And this is kind of a very significant moment in his life where he's tasked with something. He feels completely out of his depth, and he kind of has an argument with God about it. But I think the reason he argues, and we'll get to this, is because he has some deep-seated issues within himself that come out, that begin to reveal himself in his conversation with God. And I wonder, as we look at Moses and we think about what God's calling him to do, and we see him as a reluctant rescuer, I wonder, do we find ourselves in Moses as well? With God speaking to us and calling us to certain things, and maybe finding ourselves arguing with God and maybe a little more reluctant to step into what God wants us to do than we should be. So let me pick us up where we left off last week. We were in Exodus chapter 1. Things are not good for the Jewish people. Pharaoh is paranoid. They're getting too numerous. They're going to rise up against us. We've got to stop this. So he puts in these 3 different things to just really crush the people. He makes them slaves, and he makes them work very hard, very harsh labor. When that doesn't help, when that doesn't stop the multiplication of the people, he calls in the midwives and he says, all right, you guys will be there when the babies are born. Kill them, especially the boys. Let's get rid of them. And of course, that doesn't work either. The midwives are unwilling to help. And then at the end, he's like, all right, everybody here that can hear my voice, listen to me. All Egypt, I want you to help with this big problem that we've got. So if you see a baby boy, you have permission to just grab it by the leg and toss it into the river. Nothing's going to happen to you. You get a free pass. You want to let out some frustrations? Go right ahead. Get that boy and just throw it. And that's the situation right here. Things aren't good. Things are pretty bad for the Jewish people as slaves in Egypt. And so then we pick it up at Exodus chapter 2, and this is where we meet our friend Moses. Now, I grew up in Sunday school. And we had this thing called flannel graph. Anybody remember flannel graph? I even had AI generate me some flannel graph pictures for you this morning. Wonderful teaching tool. You know, it was the iPad before there were iPads, right? It didn't look that good. It did not look that good. AI did a way too good a job on that one. I agree. So these were the stories. Who heard this story in Sunday school? Let me see the hands. There we go. I love that. So you know the story. So let's dive in. I'm going to read some of the story to you. It says, now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. It raises the question, what if he'd not been a fine child? What would have happened then? But we won't go there. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. So it's interesting, right? Even right here in this moment, we see another act of civil disobedience. The midwives were unwilling to do it. We see that probably most of the people were unwilling to kill the boys because not a lot of it happened. But here we find this Levi man and woman. They have a child. There's clearly a law that says this is what you're to do. And they just go, no, we're not. We fear God more than we fear Pharaoh. And so we're unwilling to kill our son. Now, but put yourself in this moment. Women, ladies, you've just had this child. You birthed this child. You're holding this baby boy in your arms. You look down and you see, oh, wow, it's a boy. And you know in the back of your mind what's supposed to happen. Having a child is stressful enough. Trying to figure out how to parent a child and get them to sleep through the night is stressful enough. Could you imagine the added stress of figuring out how to hide a child for months so that no one knows that he's in your home? Think that might have been a little scary, a little fear-inducing? Probably. And she does, though. She hides the child until she can't enter any longer. And so she devises this plan. And it's interesting because remember last week when we were talking about this, we said this story isn't a story on its own. It's a story that is tied to the previous story of Genesis. And this is just a thread that's continuing to run through. We saw it in chapter 1. We see it even here. Because even as we see this, another tie-in that we need to see to the creation story, to what was happening in Genesis. In fact, in our translation, it says she put him in a basket. And the Hebrew word here is teva. Teva. And it's only used one other time in the Bible. It's used in Genesis. Anybody want to guess where? To describe a vessel that is in the water that saves people. Oh, there we go. Yes, the only other time this is used is to describe Noah's ark. Isn't that fascinating? We can look at this and go, what a coincidence. Or we can look at this and go, God is a master composer. He is a master writer and author to be able to weave these things into our story. Another parallel to remind us this is God's story. He's continuing to write, and this is not isolated and standing on his own. God is doing something. So we've got the baby. It's in a basket. It's in the Nile. Sister's watching. Let's see what happens. Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe. Her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket along with the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. What a great job, right? I mean, it's like, it's not only having to take care of your child, but then you're getting paid for it. That's nice. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, we don't know how much older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. A few things to highlight here. First one is this: Moses is saved through the water. I mean, think about this. This is a significant thing. We've seen this before in Noah's Ark. We're going to see this again later when we get to the Red Sea. But think about the imagery of being saved through the water, an image of baptism. You know, baptism. Here, what is represented through baptism? Death raised to life. And that's essentially what's happened to Moses here, isn't it? He's basically, they don't know if he's going to live. They put him out on the water. They hope everything's going to be okay, but he could have just as easily died as lived. But through the water, he lives. And notice the irony here. It is precisely the parents' desire to keep their baby from Pharaoh and rescue him from this horrific decree. And it's Pharaoh's desire to kill this child that leads him to going into the Nile, being rescued from the Nile, and then being raised in Pharaoh's house. Isn't that crazy? The irony that's happening here, none of this would have happened possibly if Pharaoh hadn't have made the decree to throw the kids in the Nile. But they did, and then look at what unfolds before us. What should have been a place of death for Moses' mother became a place of refuge for Moses. Think about that. Again, put yourself in the shoes of these parents. Can you imagine being in a place, moms, dads, where you feel like the only way forward for your child is to put them in a basket on the Des Moines or Raccoon River? That seems wild, doesn't it? Can you imagine the heartache, the just gut-wrenching emotion happening within you to be able to get to that place? The stress of keeping him hidden, that decision, that desperation that you must feel to do anything to try to save your kid. And then put yourself in Pharaoh's daughter's position. I kind of read this and I think, oh, there were some daddy issues, or there had to be, right? I mean, she had to be kind of like Brent in that she's like, oh, dad said I had to do this. I'm just going to do the opposite. You know, a little bit of a challenger in me. I get that. But she sees this baby. Why rescue him? Why? Why not just tell the slave, just scoot that thing on down the river? What a pain. Why not just dump the basket here and there and be done with it? Does she have any concerns about what dad's going to say? We don't get any of those answers, but such a fascinating thing to consider. And so here, just in these few verses, we see that Moses' life didn't start with roses and buttercups. It started off under a lot of pain, stress, and turmoil. But his life isn't going to get any easier. Because we turn the page and then we find that we don't know anything about his upbringing. The next verse just says, after Moses had grown up. What does that mean? Who knows? We don't know. But you can read part of the story, and I won't read it all to you now, but we basically find that there's this story where Moses is out one day and he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. And what's interesting is the Bible says that he sees the Egyptian beating one of Moses' own people. Now let's keep that in mind, because I think this is going to help us to understand possibly an identity crisis that Moses has. Who am I? Am I Egyptian? Am I Hebrew, Jewish? What am I? So in this moment, he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. And so Moses is like, that's not right. You're hurting my people. He decides to step in. And like all rational people, he kills the guy. Seems like such an overreaction, but okay. But evidently Moses knows he's done something wrong, because his reaction then is not to just leave the body out. He buries the body in the sand. And you think, okay, this has got to make Moses a hero to his people. They're going to just come. Where's the confetti? Where's the parade to say, good job, Moses. Thank you for rescuing me. And yet you continue reading, and the next day, 2 Hebrew people are fighting, and Moses tries to step in. Hey, what's going on here? Can't we just talk this out? And instead of hearing him out and thinking, oh, Moses, you're right, we can work this out, they look at him and they say this, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you going to kill me just like you killed the Egyptian? Well, where's the gratitude? Where's the gratitude for the saving of the person the day before? Here, what we find in this moment is some foreshadowing that's going to be a continued narrative through the rest of the Pentateuch, just so you know, not just Exodus, but Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, where these people are going to constantly question Moses' leadership and authority. They don't look at him as the Savior. They look at him as, who are you? As you can imagine, if you were in Moses' shoes, he's freaked out just a little bit. He knows what he's done. He's even tried to hide it, but he's been found out. And Pharaoh finds out, and he's after him now too, tries to kill him. So Moses runs to a place called Midian. And in a few short verses, we find that Moses goes from being in the privileged status of the king's house to a fugitive on the run in a foreign land. What a turn of events. What an incredible turn. While he's in Midian, he goes to the place where people go, the well. And while he's there, some women show up. They're there to feed the sheep, and there's some other people there, and they're starting to harass the women. And Moses comes to the rescue. Interesting, right? Moses has something within him that's like, I want justice. I want to step into this. And so he sees the women being harassed. He's like, I'm going to help you. And he does. So the women go home, and their dad's like, why are you back so early? And they tell him, we got harassed. These people were after us, but there was this guy. And this guy stepped up and helped us. And he rescued us. And the dad's like, go get him. And like all dads would do, he says, thanks for saving my daughters. Here, take one as a wife. I mean, that's how Colin got Liz. I mean, something like that, right? I don't know. Sorry, Liz, you really shouldn't sit in front of me. I just see you right here. So she's like, I'm finding another church right now. No, Dad says, and here, take my daughter. She can be your wife. I mean, and it's fascinating too. You want to talk about the tie-ins again? What else? Where else did we see a well with somebody going to a well and finding a wife as a result? We saw that a couple of times in the Old Testament. I mean, in Genesis, didn't we? I mean, it's these things, these patterns are being repeated over and over again. I just think the well must be the original Tinder. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, something's happening at the well that's guys are finding wives. I don't know. So then we get to the end of Exodus chapter 2, and here's what we read. And what I want you to see here is that now we have a twist. Because remember last week I told you, God has been incredibly absent, very rarely mentioned up till this point, until we get to the end of chapter 2, where it ends this way. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Now we can take a deep breath, right? Finally, where has God been this whole time? Has God been absent? Has he cared? And we see, okay, he's been paying attention. He knows. He's concerned. Notice the language here, though, that is used to describe the people's pain. I think on the next slide I have it highlighted for you. They groaned. They cried out. They're wondering, is there any hope? Is there any hope? That's a great question to ask sometimes, isn't it? Sometimes we get to places where we wonder, is there any hope? But also look at God's response. A better translation might be take this whole passage, that last part there, and say God saw and God knew. They may think God has forgotten. He hasn't. And God is about to do something about it. He's about to step in. Now, the next two chapters, so that's been chapters 1 and 2 we've covered so far. 3 and 4 is where we get the most famous story of Moses. It's probably one, even if you've never been in church, you've probably heard of it, because Moses is out tending the sheep one day. And as he's there, he looks over, and he's not close to home at this point. He's actually at a place called Mount Horeb. And you may think, I think I've heard of that. You have. It's called the Mountain of God. It's called by a couple of different names in the Old Testament. It's also known as Mount Sinai. What's interesting is where Moses is right here in this moment. Moses is going to be coming back to very shortly. But he's minding his business. He's going through his daily routine. He's out there with the sheep when the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire. It did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he'd gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Okay, think about this moment. I love, sometimes we just read it and we move on, but I just want you to put yourself in this moment. Close your eyes if you need to. You're going through your daily routine. Everything's normal. Everything's fine. Something catches your eye. What's that? Well, that's weird. That thing's on fire. It's not burning up. And then out of that bush that's on fire, you hear your name. Your name is called. That's a little startling, isn't it? As you hear your name, you say, here I am. And then that voice calls out and says, stay where you are. Don't come closer. But prepare yourself. You're on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What's your response? What do you do in the presence of God? Think about Moses' response. He hid his face. That's interesting, isn't it? Hid his face because he knew, he understood something different. I don't know if he knew exactly what was going on, though. We're going to get to that in a second, why I don't think so. But this guy has the most interesting life, doesn't he? He's got the voice, everything's happening. And let me encourage you this week. We're not going to read all of chapters 3 and 4, but if you have time this week, read it in its entirety. Let me paraphrase it a little bit. God says, I've seen the misery of my people, their hardship. I hear their cries. I know their suffering. And as you read God's response or what God is saying to Moses, you understand that God has more than just an awareness of what's happening. Our English language doesn't really do this justice sometimes, because God's awareness is more than just, oh, I see. There's an intenseness behind what's being communicated, where God is saying, not just I see and I know, but where he's implying that what you are experiencing is happening to me as well. What you are going through, your suffering, is my suffering. And God says, and now I'm going to do something about it. God says, what I'm going to do, Moses, is I'm going to use you. Now, how are you guys responding to that? I'm going to use you. You're going to be my rescuer. How many of you were the eager ones again and be like, yep, that's me. God, give it to me. I'm in. Anybody more like, yeah, that sounds like a big job to me. I'm good with the sheep. Just leave me here. Life's all right, God. We get a lot of insight into Moses in this moment. Moses actually has 5 objections, and we're probably not going to get to go deep into all 5. But I will just say, God says, Moses, I'm picking you. You're my man to go do this. You know what Moses starts with? When God says this, Moses says to God, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? It's kind of interesting, isn't it? The question, who am I? Any of you ever struggled with that kind of existential question? Think about Moses. There probably is a real genuineness to his question. He was born a Hebrew. He was raised up through nursing age by a Hebrew woman, probably in that phase of life, possibly even taught about God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. But there came a point where nursing was going to end, and then he's going back to the palace of Pharaoh, where he would be known then as the grandson of the king. He would have access to riches and wealth. He would have access to the best education that there was to offer. He would have access and probably be trained in the religions of the Egyptians and all the multiple gods that they had. The one time he stands up to protect his people, he said, don't, Egyptian, stop beating my people here. And yet the next day they reject him as their people. No, get out of here. You're not one of us. You kind of understand why Moses could have this existential crisis going on within him to be like, I don't know who I am. What are you doing, God? Why in the world would you pick me? I don't even know who I am. It's a fascinating moment for him to try to figure out who he is. I asked, have you ever been there? Have you ever been to that place where you just go, I don't even know who I am anymore? Not understanding who we are can really limit our ability to know what we're supposed to do and even cause us to question God. But this isn't the first objection or the only objection that Moses raised, because let me just say this. I love God's response. When Moses says, who am I? God doesn't look at him and say, well, you're a Jewish guy. And you've got all the right stuff, Moses. You've got the smarts, you've got the strength, you've got the education, you've got it all. God doesn't stroke his ego at all. You know what God does tell him? God says, I will be with you. Now that seems like a failed response in some way. What do you mean I'll be with you? There's something going on here where Moses has to understand who's going to be the one doing the rescuing. Moses may be the mouthpiece, but God is going to be the one doing it. Who am I? God says, I'm with you. That's really all you need to know. There's a second question that Moses asks, because he's not content with this first response. So he looks and he says, okay, God says, you'll be with me. All right, but here's my second question. Who are you? Says, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Interesting question, right? Remember what I just said. He probably had the beginning of his life learning about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then when do you stop nursing a child back then? I have no clue. 3 to 5 years old, maybe. Okay. So at some level, from 5 to 20 or 18 or whatever, in that span, he's learning all about the Egyptian gods and he's being trained there. That's a legitimate question. Which one are you? Who are you? Leads to an even greater understanding, doesn't it? How can we move? how can we respond if we don't know the God we're supposed to be responding to? Two very critical questions, I think, that we minimize sometimes, but true questions that are critical in us knowing even how to live life. Who am I and who is God? And I think sometimes we love to move past those questions thinking if I get greater biblical knowledge, then that'll answer that. And yet really, these two questions can only be known experientially in the presence of God. Who are you? I love God's response. What's he say? He says, I am. I am that I am. And you know what? That's enough. His answer is basically, I am the one you've heard about. I'm the one that you've heard all your life. Don't worry. They'll listen to me. Now, for most of us, we would think maybe those two questions should be satisfactory, but they're not. So Moses continues and he says, oh, but what if? What if they don't believe me? Man, isn't it crazy how sometimes these questions just kind of become our questions? Who am I? Who is God? And, well, God, what if? What if I fail? What if this doesn't go like I think? What if this is uncomfortable? What if? Moses has the same question. So for Moses, God says, well, let me show you some things. And he does a couple of miracles. He says, throw your staff down, and the staff becomes a serpent. And then God says, pick it up, to which Brent would have said, you're out of your mind, don't thank you. But Moses picks it up, it becomes a staff again. He says, Moses, put your hand in your cloak. He does, he pulls it out, it's leprous. He says, put it back in, it's healed. At this point, maybe some of us might have our mind change. Not Moses. Moses says, then I can't. Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Again, to me, this kind of goes back to the who is God question. At least that's to me the way God responds, because God's response is perfect. Who gave you a mouth anyway? Oh, that's right, I did. I think if I put that mouth in your head, I can make that mouth speak. Again, you get to this place and you think, all right, Moses is convinced. And then he doesn't. He's still not convinced. Because his last objection is, I won't. This one kind of frustrates God a little bit. He's been patient up till now, and he exercises great restraint. And he basically says, fine, use your brother Aaron. That's fine. Just you'll talk to Aaron, I'll talk to you. And it's interesting because he says to Moses, you will be Aaron's God. I'll be your God. Creating some really interesting dynamic there. This is Moses' response. Our time is done, but I do want to point out one other thing at the end of chapter 4 is a really strange passage. And most people say, don't preach on this, so I'm not. But I'm going to tell you, you should read it because it's weird. Moses is going back to do what God has said. God's angry with him, is going to kill him. And the solution is circumcising their son. Moses' wife does it, throws the foreskin at Moses, and then God relents. What do you do with that? Nobody knows. I mean, nobody knows. But the reason I'm telling you this is because in 4 chapters in Exodus, we find God using 6 women to save Moses' life. That's significant. In a patriarchal culture, 6 women of prominence Moses can do what he can do because 6 women stepped up and did what he couldn't. So, there you go. I knew you'd like that, Amy. It's amazing what we don't think is possible if we don't know who we are and we don't know who God is. I just want worship team, go ahead and come back. You read this story of Moses, it's so familiar, it can get lost in like a nice Bible story that I heard one time. But I think we really have to put ourselves in Moses' position. Are we stuck? Personally, individually, however, because we struggle with knowing who we are and who God is. I mean, those two questions that Moses asked, I think, are two questions that humanity has struggled with from the beginning. And I think many of us may struggle with that as well. Because we don't know who we are, because we don't really know who God is, we find ourselves just floundering out there trying to find our way. Why are these two questions so critical? Because number one, if you don't know who you are, you'll find yourself constantly trying either to prove yourself or to hide yourself, when all along God continues to just say, you are my child, you're a child of the King, you're totally and completely loved. There's nothing that I would not do for you. And we need to hear that and understand that so that we can feel the freedom to be able to move in knowing who we are. But that can only be satisfied when and if we really truly know and understand who God is. Go back, listen to the 6 or 8 messages we did this summer on God. Because if we ever question that, it's always going to screw us up. It's always going to make us veer off path. It's always going to put us in a position of thinking, first, I have to prove myself to God. Or God's going to be mad at me, or God's going to do this, or whatever. Remember, you are on holy ground, and God looks at us and says, take off your shoes. That's the top, okay? The holiness of God transcends it all, except it never transcends his love. Because God is love, and he looks at us and he says, I love you. And when we truly, fully understand God's love, then we find the freedom to just live the life that's before us that God is calling us to live. And we don't have to be arrogant about it. We don't have to be so prideful in our humility that, oh, no, not me, not me. We just get to live and exist in his love. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like the place I want to be. I don't want to go down the path of Moses. Well, who am I and who are you and what if and I can't and I won't. I want to know who God is so that it informs who I am. And so I can find the freedom to just live life in the grace and love of God each and every day. What's God speaking to you this morning? What's God saying to you? What's the invitation through the life of Moses that God is saying, I desire this for you?